Awesome. We are live. Good evening, everyone. My name is Aisha, and I'm in the marketing team at Newton School. We have Sidhant with us today. Sidhant, could you wave at the camera for our audience? Yeah. So, for those of you who don't know what Newton School does, we are an ethics startup that teach software development to individuals who aspire to become software developers in the course of 5 months. And what is special about this is that you only have to pay us once you get placed. So there's no upfront fees that we charge you, and you only pay us once you get placed with a company. Right, that's about Newton School. Coming to a little bit about Siddhant here. He is a software engineer at Google, and he has previously worked in companies like Amazon. And when I reached out to him for the webinar, he was pretty excited, and he has written a really interesting article on a Google coding interview template. Right, so I've linked that in the description box. You can go check it out. Before we jump onto the session, I'd like to mention that we'll be taking up questions from you guys in between the session and towards the end as well. So drop in your questions in the comment section. And yeah, let's begin. Siddhant, and he's written a really...
Hey, hi everyone. Let me just share my screen and then we can start.
Yeah.
Can you all see my screen now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Hey everyone, welcome to this webinar. My name is Sidhant, and I'm going to discuss with you something very practical and a very behavioral topic. It's called the coding interview and the stress factor. So I'll talk about some things that you can do to reduce interview stress and hence perform better at coding interviews. I personally have experienced this before, and I'm sure most of you have since you are here, right? And I'll help you with some strategies that I've accumulated myself to overcome these factors. And I hope you will be able to learn and implement some of these over time. While primarily this would help you for coding interviews, but you can extract out some concepts that can be applied for any interview. So yeah, let's start. Before that, a little bit about me. Like Aisha said, I'm a software engineer with Google.
Siddhant, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think your video is off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you see me now?
Yes. Perfect.
Right. So as I was saying, I work for Google. I'm a software engineer. I just joined a couple of months back. I primarily have experience on the backend side. And before that, I worked for Amazon and a couple of other startups. And I graduated from IIT Roorkee in the year 2013. I've been in Bangalore since. And incidentally, I studied electrical engineering in college. And as you might have all guessed, I mostly learned coding on my own. Some of it was in the latter half of college, and most of it was on the job. So here's what we'll talk about today. Firstly, we'll discuss about what interview stress is and why does it happen. We'll talk about the coding interviews and some things that happen behind the scenes that you might not be aware of. Then we'll discuss a structure that can help us mitigate the interview stress, and particularly for a coding interview. And we'll also discuss what you can do yourself to implement this structure in your interviews and help you succeed. And one more thing before we start, I wanted to clarify who is the intended audience of this presentation. So this is ideally for people who are already preparing for coding interviews, studying data structures and algorithms, grinding out questions from lead code, and so on. Or in case you are planning to prepare in the future, you are also a very good audience for this. And people who have already done the preparations and are already appearing for interviews currently can also use this approach. But the results would be more obvious for the former group. And you'll know why as we progress through this. So anyway, let's talk about stress, right? Have you ever felt like this during an interview? So the interviewer just started and he probably gave you a problem to solve. and you're thinking about it, and the problem looks a little difficult on the outside, and you don't know how to start. Meanwhile, you have this sudden rush of thoughts and nervousness, and you feel rather overwhelmed. Between this, you have some other doubts that creep into your mind whether you'll be able to crack this interview or not. In some cases, you think that you have already screwed up this interview just after looking at the question, and you think about your backup plans while the interview has just started, right? This did happen to me a lot of times when I was interviewing like a couple of months before. And in fact, it happened to me in almost all my interviews. And I really thought about this, and I tried to figure out why does this happen. And I read about it online, and this is what I found, right? So this happens due to something called cortisol. So cortisol is a chemical that is released by your body, specifically the adrenal glands by your body into the bloodstream when you are under a high level of stress. And there's nothing you can do about it really, since it happens to everyone, precisely to all mammals. And it's a basic evolutionary process that we developed over time. Here's how it all started. So imagine you are a prehistoric caveman and you come face to face with a tiger. The only option you have right now is either fight it or just run away. In most cases, you would rather run away, right? But both these actions need abundant amounts of energy. So your body, very intelligently, it tries to stop the wastage of energy in all the non-essential things. Take for instance digestion. You don't really need that right now, right? You'd rather run and save your life. So your body shuts them down to conserve energy, and this is regulated through this chemical that I talked about earlier. That was called cortisol. Other notable side effects of cortisol include higher heart rate, higher blood pressure, accelerated breathing, and things which can help you burn more food and generate more energy. So this sounds logical, right? I mean, if this is an evolutionary process, then it must be good for you. It is only that we are not cavemen anymore. So these days, we are much more likely to come under like psychological stress rather than physical stress. That is a problem because cortisol has one more profound side effect: brain fade. Apparently, when you are face to face with a tiger, your brain function is also impaired because it is also non-essential at the time, right? You don't need your brain to run. So the result, cloudy thoughts and unclear reasoning. So that's essentially what you feel during an interview. You're stressed, you keep overthinking, you get more stress, and finally your brain fades out, and you can't concentrate on the interview, and you think more about the outcomes and how you're performing. So that's quite terrible. Coding a knapsack BP problem is tougher than everything already, right? Imagine doing that without a brain. That's almost impossible. And that's not all. So in a virtual interview during COVID times, when the interviewer cannot see exactly what you're doing, he probably thinks that you're working on the problem. Only that you're freaking out on the other side, right? Okay, I'm exaggerating, but you are stressed out. So this interview can only go in one direction now, south. So what can you do? Can you do anything about it? Turns out, yes, you can. Like I said, I face this situation in every interview, and I try to figure a way out. Uh, and there is something that I did figure out. I call it a pre-mortem. That is something that we need to do before an interview, before all interviews actually. So you have to recognize that you're not gonna function at your best when you're stressed, and accept that fact. And then you gotta put some systems in place to deal with that. And one of those systems is called muscle memory. What is muscle memory anyway? You might have heard about it before. Muscle memory occurs when, through repetition, you do the same set of steps for a task again and again. And although it is called muscle memory, it has got nothing to do with muscles literally. It's a misnomer. This is actually subconsciously stored in your brain, allowing you to perform a task without conscious effort. It is the subconscious memory. And you don't have to think before doing it. For example, think about a time when you were riding a bicycle or navigating a map or typing your password. you don't have to think about a password once you use it enough times, right? It just comes naturally to you. You see a form, to enter a password, you just type it, thanks to muscle memory. And how do you do it? You have to train your brain with a set of repetitive structures of tasks, like we said. So basically, designate a structure and keep following it again and again religiously until it comes to you naturally without thinking. So this looks quite abstract, right? You must be thinking, what is this structure and how do you practice it? Hold on to this thought for a while, and we'll come back to it and try to make it more concrete. Before that, let's discuss about what a coding interview exactly is. This will help us understand what kind of structure do we need. A coding interview is basically when you're asked to solve a problem live in front of the interviewer. You could have solved that problem before while practicing, and that's the best case. And it usually doesn't happen, right? Sometimes you get new questions. And in most cases, you come across a brand new question or a variation of an existing question. So you have to understand it from the top, visualize it, convert it into a real world problem, convert it from a real world problem to your computer science problem, figure out an approach, code the solution, and eventually it has to turn out correct and also well optimized. This is quite a task. And your coding problem could occasionally deal with data structures and algorithms, and you have to usually solve it in around 45 minutes to an hour. Sometimes there could be multiple questions asked in a single interview, and sometimes you could also have multiple rounds of coding interviews, or a mix of both, right? So one point to note here is that in larger MNCs like Google, Amazon, and so on, the interviewer is actually a messenger of the company. He's been sent to present a problem, record feedback about how you performed, and the ultimate hiring call is actually decided by a larger panel, which may or may not consist of the interviewer. Like in Amazon, I know the interviewer is part of the panel, but each interviewer has to provide an independent feedback before they meet together in a meeting. This is called the debrief meeting, where all interviewers meet together and discuss about you and the reasons to hire you or not hire you. In Google, actually, it's a little different. All interviewers draft their feedback, and which then goes to a different central hiring committee where a similar thing is done, but in the absence of the interviewers. So, given that interview performance is a very subjective matter and it might vary from person to person, and given the fact also that in some cases the interviewer might not be present, like in a meeting where this is decided. So, how do you make it more quantifiable from your side? The answer is data points. So you must think that the interviewer is in your team and he's going to fight for you ultimately. The more amount of positive data points that you can provide to the interviewer, they can build a case to hire you. You might have noticed that sometimes the interviewer continuously takes notes through the interview, right? So they are essentially gathering data points about you. They basically have to mention the good things about you, and how well your approach was, and how well your thought process was, and so on. Obviously, you can't do everything perfectly, but if your goods supersede your averages and bats, you get hired. That's the basic thumb rule. Okay, that was a lot of information. So let's recap about the things that we discussed so far. First, to deal with interview stress, you need a structure that you can practice before and be good at it during the interview. This would help activate the muscle memory that we talked about before and help you navigate interview stress. And secondly, the same structure can act like a means of providing as many data points as possible to the interviewer. And does this help get you hired? Now, what is this structure? Um, should we pause to take on any questions if we have about this?
Sure. I don't think there are any questions. But guys, if you have any questions for the slides that Sidhant has presented till now, or there are any points you need clarity on, please drop them in the comment section, and we will address them. So Sidhant, let's wait for like a minute, see if people have questions. If not, I think we can move on.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't see any questions as of now, so I think we can move on. Okay, there's one question by Stark asking us what are data points.
Okay, so data points are basically certain things about you that the interviewer notes down, and he presents them as facts. The basic thing is that the interviewer does not present any of his own opinions in the interview debrief. He just presents what facts are there about you and what things you presented during the interview. So these are called data points. We'll discuss them in the future slides, what exactly they are and how can you work on them.
All right. So I think that's it for now. Let's move
Okay.
on and address a few more questions later.
Sure. Yeah. Let's recap this again. First, to deal with interview stress, you need a structure that you can practice before and be good at it during the interview. This would help activate muscle memory. And secondly, the same structure should act like a means of providing as many data points as possible to the interviewer and thus get you hired. Now, what is this structure? This is the structure that I personally use, and I'll give you a moment to go through this before I continue. What I usually do is before every interview starts, I write these checkpoints down and strike them off during the interview after completing them. You must be wondering, like, this is not rocket science, right? I already do all of this in my head. How does writing them down help? Firstly, you do recognize that you will be stressed and you might forget some of these aspects of the problem, right? And secondly, during interview training, an interviewer, like I said, the interviewer is actually told to look for data points which help in assessing the candidates. These are like facts about the candidate, the things that he does in an interview, and which gives them data points about whether they should hire you or not. So if you list them down from your side, then their job is half cut out. Right. So let's go over them one by one and talk about why are they particularly important and what you can specifically do for each of them. The first thing is requirements. In case you have had some software engineering experience, you might have realized that every project that you worked on starts with creating a project spec, right? You might call it a PRD, you might or a project requirement document, or so on. But the intent is the same. It details all the requirements of that project and deep dives into all of them. And why do they do that? I mean, why do companies encourage employees to do that? Because people forget. All people do, right? So when an interview starts, the interviewer says out loud what problem you need to solve. They might go over it very quickly, and you might not remember the specific points about it later. So what I typically do is I write these points down, ask clarifying questions that can help me understand the problem. Clarifying questions are actually never bad for you. In fact, sometimes the interviewer deliberately describes the problem in an ambiguous way so that they can check what questions you ask and they can record their feedback about it. This is because in real life, like when we work for companies, work for these MNCs, the problems that you solve are actually very ambiguous, and sometimes companies need to test how well you deal with these kind of situations and what kind of questions you ask to make this situation more clear. So asking questions never got anyone rejected. Do ask questions, as many questions as you can. Secondly, each problem has some basic and core use cases which need to be solved, right? I usually write those things down with confirmation of the interviewer. So I go through the question again and I ask him these questions and I write those things down. I also ask the interviewer what are the inputs and the output types. They are important, and in some cases, they actually help in simplifying the problem in your head. Imagine if a real world problem is presented to you. It might be difficult for you to visualize the interactions and things like how will you gather input from the user. It might not be clear enough. But in most coding interviews, the interviewer would just want you to implement a method, and that method would have a return type and some input arguments. So if you make this translation at the beginning of the interview, then this problem becomes much easier. And writing things down definitely helps us grasp better, and you can read over the requirements again and again, and it will help you build a mental picture and visualize the problem. This is very critical. The second thing that I do is write the edge cases down. Edge cases, also known as corner cases, occur at some limit in your code, where your code basically malfunctions because you are not explicitly handling it. It could be null inputs, it could be zero size inputs, it could be size exceeding, and so on. These are like very specific to the particular problem that you're solving. And coders definitely have a tendency to forget the edge cases when they're coding because of a high confirmation bias. You might have noticed that the code that you write, it always seems picture perfect to you until someone else comes and points out that isn't right, and you're like, how did I miss this? And moreover, if you look at the code that you wrote from 2 years ago, you would have a lot of comments and feedback right now, but 2 years back you absolutely loved it when you wrote it. So that happens to all the coders, to all the software engineers. And you could say, I mean, in an interview, why is this important? I coded the whole solution and it works for 99% of the use cases. So what if it just breaks one of the use cases? Why is it that important? It's not a big deal, right? But it is. Edge cases are very important in a coding interview, and the code that you write is evaluated against a set of pre-decided test cases. Interviews do so because in most product-based companies, these edge cases occur in real life, and when they occur and you haven't handled it in your code, it breaks the product and it breaks the user experience, which is highly undesirable because they maintain a very high level of bar. Hence, there is a special mention about edge cases in all interview debriefs. And in case you do forget these edge cases, they are discussed by the interviewers when they discuss whether they want to hire you or not. Personally, I've observed it's highly useful to note them down even before I've written a single line of code, right, to check this bias that I talked about. So do write them, and it will also help you later when you run them against the code you wrote. And I'll come to that part later. Okay, moving ahead. The brute force approach. In a lot of interviews, candidates jump to the optimized solution immediately without discussing the brute force. That sometimes work. Mostly it works if you know the problem and you have solved it before. But in most cases, it doesn't. The reason is that you start looking at very complicated approaches even before you have an understanding of the problem in your head. Brute force does help you get a feel of the problem, like how is the problem structured, what aspects do you need to think about it, and when you jump ahead to the optimized solution, you often get stuck, and that backfires because you can't solve the problem through the entire length of the interview. Whereas if you do discuss the brute force solution, you already have a non-optimized solution in place, and having a non-optimized solution is always better than no solution. And secondly, in some instances, the brute force is in fact the desired solution. I've come across interviews myself when the solution was rather simple, and that thought did cross my mind. But I overestimated the question, and I started looking for more optimized solution, and it didn't work out in the end. So, and please note that until now, I haven't started any coding yet. I am just discussing things with the interviewer. So I think of the brute force approach, maybe mention it to the interviewer, and also discuss its complexity. Then I ask the interviewer, should I go ahead with this, or do you want me to think about more optimized solutions? In most cases, the interviewer would tell you, yeah, this seems okay, but why don't we think about something better? So that's when you think about optimizations. One way to approach the optimal solution is to look at the brute force solution and optimize certain steps that can be performed better. When you do it, when you keep thinking about the brute force solution, something does crop up, and but sometimes it's not always very obvious to you. In some cases, the interviewer can provide you with hints to unblock you, and that's okay. In the worst case scenario, when things are absolutely standstill, it's okay to ask the interviewer for direction. So you might think that you are asking the interviewer for directions, and that might work against you. But realistically, what happens is that in the interview feedback, the interviewer will take a note that I gave the interviewee some hints, and he took it and solved the problem. That works, right? That's not a no hire. If you have 5 rounds of interviews and you ask for hints in 1 or 2 of them, that's not a bad thing. Because in real life, we do ask for help to our peers and colleagues while doing our work, right? and that's acceptable. um, Sometimes you might also need to go over this approach of going over optimized solutions multiple times. You might start with the complexity of n cube, then go to n square with help of the interviewer, and finally you might come to the best log n solution or whatever. So keep asking the interviewer if this is enough, or should I optimize further. The only point I'm saying is that don't jump to the coding. Confirm with the interviewer what he wants before you start coding. Otherwise, both of you are at a loss. Okay, this is the ultimate part, coding. If you've done everything right that I've mentioned so far, this should be the easiest part of the coding interview. And if you have solved and practiced coding questions before, and you know the requirements crystal clear, and you have confirmed with the interviewer at every stage what he wants, then you are pretty good at this already. The only tip I have here is that the interviewers usually do not care about nitpicks like semicolons or bracket, as long as the core logic inside is correct. So don't worry about them a lot. Just think about what you have done everything until now, and try to convert it into the coding form. After you've coded the solution, you have to dry run that against a set of test cases. A dry run can actually make or break you. Believe it or not, even the best of coders write buggy code. I do, and so do you. So it's extremely important to run it through a couple of sample test cases to check if everything is okay. Probably you wrote some use cases before, right? In the requirement section. It's now the time to run them through the solution. And you also had written down a set of edge cases before that. I said that it'll come handy later. So you run them right now and make sure your code handles it correctly. Now you know, right, why I keep asking you to write things down. In this process of writing your code, if you do find bugs, it's okay. You can go and fix the part of the code that actually broke these test cases. It's at least better than the interviewer pointing them out to you, and that would result in a negative feedback. Always remember to run your code and find your bugs yourself. You are the developer, and the interviewer is not your QA. You have to figure it out yourself. And these are basically the template that I was talking about. If you practice this template, so the thing is, you have to try this at home, right? You have to follow this structure while solving any coding question. You might be practicing from Geeks for Geeks or Lead Code or HackerRank or wherever. It doesn't matter. It might be a very small array problem. It might be a very complicated DP problem. But always use this approach while solving any problem. So that's when the muscle memory comes down. And you, if you follow this approach when practicing questions, you won't have any problems implementing it in a real life interview. And you need to build this habit, basically to overcome stress. That's what the whole learning was. So from what I discussed, this sounds odd, but you must realize this, that the most important things of a coding interview is not actually the code that you write. It's more about your approach. That's what company really tests. Because think about when you're given a question and you have done that question before, it must be really easy for you, but it'll be difficult for someone who hasn't done it. So that's not objectively testing a candidate, right? So what companies test is your approach. How are you approaching the question? How do you break a real life problem into a computer science problem? How do you break a bigger problem into smaller ones, solve them independently, test them, and work things out? So that's what matters. So yeah, that was all that I had. Thank you so much for listening to me. This approach surely helped me and my friends, and I hope it helps you too. Feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. If you did like this and you want to get similar tips and tricks, you can scan this badge or use the URL. In case you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them now.
All right, Sidhant. We do have a few questions in the comment section.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, let me just go through them.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so there's one question like, is there any platform which can provide mock interview? So yeah, there's one platform called Lead Code. It requires a premium subscription, but I think it's worth it, and I use it myself. So it actually provides you previous questions from which were actually asked in real life interviews, and they sorted based on companies, and you can appear for mock coding interviews over there. Another question is how to prepare for a placement drive. Can you tell me major coding concepts? It's really similar. Mostly when you're preparing for placement drives, when companies go to hire freshers, they usually test problem solving and coding abilities. So the main thing that you can do is prepare for data structures, algorithms, prepare them thoroughly, and keep solving questions on LeetCode or HackerRank or any platform. That doesn't matter. Because it's all about practice, right? You might have seen that some people perform too good at coding interviews while some people struggle. It's all about how much they have practiced before, how acquainted they are to the major concepts. So yeah, just keep studying and keep practicing, and it just comes naturally to you. Where should we practice? That I told about this. It's lead code. Any further points that we can gain? I don't think I understand this. How can you please suggest what is the basically required to get hired in Google? Okay. So yeah, I can talk a little bit about Google interviews. For freshers, you usually get hired at L3. For moderately experienced people, you get hired at L4, and for senior folks, you get hired at L5 and L6, and so on. For L3 and L4, they usually test data structures and problem-solving abilities, stacks, linked lists, arrays, trees, graphs, and so on. Like all of these deeply, you need to practice these concepts on your own. And yeah, that's the only thing that you can do. There's one more question. Do product companies conduct preliminary activity tests? Is mandatory. So it depends on the company. When there's a mass hiring drive, then they do hire. Then they use aptitude tests to filter out candidates. But in case it isn't, and you are kind of an experienced folk, then usually they don't have aptitude test for high experiences. How do you keep yourself motivated when the interview process goes over days? Yeah, that's really tough, right? The main thing that you can do is that you can think is this is a very temporary phase, right? The interview process will go on for a month, but think about your dream job, and when you get through it, the amount of happiness that you get. So that basically drove me, and I guess that's a good enough motivation for you guys. Thinking about going to that company and working your heart out, that's really encouraging for me. There's one more question: how we should introduce the interviewer so that a good image is being made in the beginning only. I don't think this really matters um, because like imagine you're a fresher, right? You wouldn't have a lot of projects in your belt. The only thing that the interviewer tests is how you perform live in the coding interview. So just give a brief about yourself, the things that you do like to work on, the things that you experience on, and that should be good. I don't think this matters a lot, and there's actually companies try to overcome this. So there's this initial bias, right? When the first impression lasts long. So companies actually try to overcome this, and they ask interviewers not to have a first impression and rather go on data points and deal with this rather objectively. Um, I'm not that strong in dynamic programming or recursion. How to improve? Yeah, I mean that is dynamic programming is like one of the toughest concepts in programming. I myself do struggle with it a lot, and the only thing I can say is practice. Practice is the only thing. Lead code. I've been saying this a lot to try lead code because it has helped me personally. I don't endorse them or something, but it has actually helped me uh, like progress through interviews and be better at myself, and it has helped a lot of my friends also, and it is a de facto standard In the US, usually like for people who are appearing for competitive interviews and for product-based companies, it is the de facto in the US. So do check it out. They do have a premium subscription, but you can also try the free one. So do try LeetCode out. It's really good because the more you practice, the more the more good it is for you. May I know which language you have used in review? I personally use Java, but it doesn't matter because most of the code that you write in an interview is between pseudocode and real life code, and it doesn't matter what exact language you use because most product-based companies they know that languages are not that difficult to learn. Once you have the fundamentals ready, you can grasp anything that you want. There's one more. How backend developer portfolio looks like to hire in a unicorn. So your portfolio usually matters to get like a resume check, basically to get an interview call. But in case you do get a referral, then that works well for you. Otherwise, most of like I would say less than 10% of it matters on your previous history on what you have done until now, and 90% of it is based on interview performance. So don't stress about that a lot. The past is a bygone, right? You can't do anything about it. But what you can work on is your current skills and how well can you solve for interviews. Any tips for virtual interviews? Yeah, this is a great tip that like this whole structure that I said. You can actually write them down on a piece of paper beside you, and you can use that while you're giving the interview, and strike them off during the interview. And one more thing that I noticed is during a virtual interview, uh, do not. I'm always stressing on this fact that do not jump over to the coding part directly. Solve these things on a piece of paper. Uh, like build your mindset, build your understanding around the problem, and then go to the coding part. So that should be very important. We should elaborate the things or keep them short. This is a question from Praveen. It depends. You should always get a vibe from the interviewer, what he is looking for. In a coding interview, you don't have to elaborate a lot because the interviewer is familiar with the problem. So in case you are going in the right direction and you say things about that, so he will get a feel that you are also going in the right direction. So it's there's no right answer. So that it's very situational. Um, there's one more question from Rahul. It says, do you use language specific features or work with basic data structure for data massaging? Um, I didn't work with language specific features before, um, but uh, but what happened is that while I was practicing for questions, I went through a lot of solutions and a lot of discussions on forums, and I discovered there are some really beautiful um, things that you can do with the language. Right, there are certain collection APIs that I had never used before, but they were quite helpful for me during an interview. For example, if you have used hash maps, then look for tree maps and tree sets. These collections in Java particularly are very useful in an interview, and they save you a lot of time. Sometimes it might happen that the interviewer might ask you to implement that collection, or at least tell something about it as to how it works. So I would also recommend you to study about them, study those collections and how do they work internally. But in most cases, you can use them as is. Um, are there any free online platforms to learn coding and develop skills for beginners? Yeah, there's one thing that I would recommend if you're a beginner. There's a video lecture series in NPTEL that's from Professor Naveen Garg. He's from IIT Delhi. It's called Data Structures and Algorithm. Maybe I can attach a link to that in the description. So I really started from there because I studied data structure algorithms back in college. I was 7 years back, and I didn't remember a lot of stuff from then. So if you want to revise those concepts, that's a really good resource. and do watch it. It's a series of around 30 to 35 videos, and it starts from the beginning till most advanced data structures, and it will help you get a feeling of the theory part, and you can use them directly in the questions when you're practicing them. Do you know any link to get knowledge of DS and algo in Python? Well, you said knowledge of on DS and algo. Actually, the way I see it is DS and algo is like a concept, and it can be implemented in any language. So they are really separate things. Learning a concept and learning a language are totally separate. So I would recommend you to understand the concepts first about DS and algo, and then understand some language and be a master in it, and then try to implement whatever you learned in DS and algo into Python. So treat them separately. Don't mix them and learn them together. There's one more question from Siddhi. It says, "Is getting a referral have more chances of landing in a resume shortlisting than applying from a career site?" Yeah, definitely. So what companies prefer is that if you have worked with someone else before, and you know that they are a great performer, and you know how they work, so and you refer them, then companies do give them a special preference. There have been studies about this, and how the probability of landing an interview on site increases with referrals. So yeah, if you have referrals, if you know someone from the company, do utilize them, because it does matter. An example problem asked to you at an interview. I can't really say that, because there are some confidential policies. But like I said, look at lead code, and you will find hundreds and hundreds of questions that have been asked in previous Google, Microsoft, Amazon in interviews of these questions. They are like real life questions. It's like a forum, like a crowdfunded forum, where people post their real life experiences, and you actually get to solve those questions. So if you do um, want to look at it, uh, log in for lead code, and you will find a lot of interview questions there. So yeah, I will attach the NPTEL link in here. I think we are done with the marathon of questions. Any other questions?
Any questions, guys? I'm so sorry. I have a power cut here, so I'm in the dark right now. Yeah, Siddhant, I think that's it for the questions. So we come towards the end of the session. Thank you so much. That was a great session. I had a few learnings too, even though I'm not in the tech field, right? So thank you so much for talking to us, talking to our audience, and this session was indeed insightful. So guys, you can follow Sidhant on LinkedIn. I'll drop his LinkedIn profile as well, and I'll make sure I get the course link as well. So thank you so much, guys. Thank you, Sidhant.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.
You too.